Welcome to Fraud Friday. I'm Bob Coleman, and we're talking loan fraud. Bankers, public officials, and borrowers who got caught. Today, we're talking about Southern California, a fraud scheme in the San Fernando Valley. And I want to talk about three specific individuals. This is a scheme which ripped off a lot of very prominent 7(a) lenders. This was not a scheme where you had a rogue lender or a rogue BDO. This scheme was successful for a number of them. Today, we're going to talk about Grasshopper Bank, and we're going to talk about Dynamic IT. Here was the deal. You got three individuals. First of all, there were a total of 14 people arrested in this scheme, $25 million. SBA, specifically PLP, business acquisition financing, and there was also some PPP and idle loans. Here are your three players. Number one, William McGrahan. He is the ringleader who orchestrated this. This is what he did. During the pandemic, he opened up a number, I'm going to use the word sleeper accounts, a number of accounts to set this scheme up. So 3-4 years later, they showed that these companies were in businesses. He then did something unique, which was he filed fake tax returns with the IRS, showing these companies made millions of dollars and had a huge tax liability. Why? Lenders want to verify the IRS documents. So they would go to the IRS and behold, yeah, this company did have $3 million in sales and it had a $500,000 profit. So it checked that box. The other thing they did is he recruited members of his community, and this is predominantly the Armenian community in Southern California, and he had a seller who was Axel Mark and also a Samuel Shaw, and these people were representing to be both the seller and the buyer. Samuel Shaw had, it's in the indictment, there's this picture of his driver's license under previous name, and he had a felony conviction back in 2011. So this entire specific loan that I'm going to talk about is rife with fraudulent. Everything was fraudulent in terms of the bank statements. The tax returns were fraudulent, even though they filed them with the IRS. They had no intention of ever paying the tax liability. Fraudulent leases, everything was fraudulent. And what he did, this William McGrahan, is he would take the money and he would structure it by making all deposits of less than $10,000 into a variety of accounts to prove to the lenders that this was a viable company that had cash transactions, even though the statements that they ultimately provided were fake. In this one particular transaction, it was a business acquisition loan, and they had to put up $400,000 in equity injection. Well, they would go to the lender and say, hey, here's a bank statement for the last 4 months showing the $400,000 is in there. And the bank would verify it, and sure enough, it was. What he was doing, he was taking money from other fraudulent proceeds, and with that $400,000 equity injection, he could then get a $3 million business acquisition loan. And very insidious what he did. So the fascinating reading of the indictment, we'll link it for you. And the person who did this actually works for the SBA, and he was the investigator on this. And so I'll be very, very specific, because lenders are very concerned about equity injection. And they were from a JP Morgan account, and they said they had seasoned funds to pay the deposit of $465,000 under the Dynamic PLP purchase. So they were obviously false, and then they also backed it up that they submitted a JP Morgan Chase bank statement showing where that money came from when they deposited of $800,000. Well, that was fraudulent. They showed the statements in the indictment. He only had $2,000, but he made it very clear. It is very easy to Photoshop these documents. In fact, the agent went through and said, hey, this is how we'll do it. Now, here's some of the takeaways we need to be aware of. And lenders got ripped off. The SBA got ripped off. The taxpayers got ripped off. Some of the funds they were saying, they, of course, went to the obligatory statement of buying toys and whatever, but also money was wired offshore and it went to Armenia. Now, some of the things that they also they identify in this scheme is all of the names of these companies were generic: Dynamics IT, Global Trading. It wasn't very specific. Also, what he did is he would go in and rent cheap office space. There was one location in Pasadena, California, and they stenciled up on the window the name of the company. Well, it was a 1-2 person office, but when the lender did the site visit, they could certainly go see that, hey, there's the company and that. And of course, these leases were, guess what, were fraudulent as well. He contacted the landlord and they never heard of them, but they had the name stenciled up on the window. Where it was interesting is, and the tax returns were all filed at the same time. So they had, for a 2023 transaction, they had tax returns of 2020, 2021, 2023. Well, they were all filed. They all showed late charges, but that was a huge red flag that they filed these tax returns not during the ordinary course of business. So I think that's one of the things that's going to come out of this case is lenders can no longer rely on the tax returns, but when were they actually filed and were the taxes actually paid? And then they're showing, well, the taxes were not paid, and I don't know how they got around that, but I think lenders are actually going to go in and say, hey, we want to make sure these taxes are paid. They also found something interesting, that they were using the same escrow officer that they went through. And so you had the fraud allegedly being involved with these escrow agents who helped facilitate it. It was the check was actually sent, the $3 million check was actually sent to the person's house. So, I mean, that doesn't make sense. You're acquiring a business, and how do you want the person to say, just send me a check? Well, if you want $3 million, usually there's something called wires, and people are very interested in the flow. And it was just, just put a check in the mail. It was deposited in a Bank of America ATM, believe it or not. I'm sure Bank of America held the funds, but it goes back to know your customer. We didn't know the seller, who was fraudulent with all these fake stuff. We certainly didn't know the buyer, who was part of this community and the fraud, and the mastermind. Oh, and then you had the similar accountant, and the accountant is presenting himself as, well, I was just doing this stuff and I wanted the business, and SBA seemed to give him a pass. But so you had similar financial statements on that. And I think what it goes down to is, this is a very huge and interesting case, is that the fraud was so complex and it tripped up a lot of good lenders. And unfortunately, what you're going to see is more and more red tape, more and more paperwork requirements by the lenders to fund these type of business acquisition loans. And I certainly don't have an issue with that, and the banks need to protect themselves, but you're now entering into a pretty high level of sophistication of review. But at the end of the day, it's know who you're doing business with. I'm talking to the lenders, and ask, why are we filing 3 years tax returns all at the same time? Okay, we have $400,000 sitting in account for 4 months, but where did that money actually come from? And they give the bank statement. And remember, they were structuring this, so there were $5,000 deposits here, $8,000. So you looked at you see all these deposits flowing back and forth. It's very sophisticated. And then the site visit. Does this little office, 2-person office in Pasadena, support a $3 million operation? And of course, it was under the guise of, well, we're offshoring and we're contracts. And it's always opaque. And as I've said, if you don't understand the transaction, understand what is the business? What are we really? Who are our customers? What are we really selling? Anyway, fascinating story. So this one was eventually, obviously, defaulted on, and there are others that will follow up on that. But it's interesting in terms of this level of sophistication. And I got to tell you, I've been looking at AI, and it's only going to get worse. Thank you for joining me today for Fraud Friday, so you can stop criminals from stealing from you.